Hello YouTube, what is up? Eroktic here. In today's video we are gonna go over the scopes in the Escape from Tarkov. We are gonna go over all the mounts that are currently in the game. I'm gonna show you how the scopes look in the different field of views. I'm gonna show you how the scopes look during the nighttime, and I'm gonna show you how the scopes look on the different parts of the gun. We're gonna compare all that, and I'm gonna give you the recommended places when to use the particular scope. But first, let's roll the intro. Our first mount is the OKP7 without of the mount. On this first example we can see different FOV, and if we pause it right here you can see that the frame looks really nicely because it is really clean, but the reticle on that scope is way too fat. I had a lot of problems to shoot the targets from the long range just because, like I said, the reticle is way too fat. In the next example you can see the rear versus the front mount, and since you're pulling away the scope away from you, the reticle is gonna be much smaller, so I'm recommending you to place OKP without the mount on the front part of the gun. And as you can see, the field of view does not affect this scope way too much, and you can use this scope in any field of view. Here is also the example during the night time, and as you can see I do not recommend you to use the OKP7 during the night with the night vision goggles on, just because of the heavy brightness of the reticle. So the best usage of the OKP7 is during the daytime on the front mount with the field of view of your choice. Our next mount is the OKP7 but with pre-built mount. The frame is the same like on the non-mounted OKP7, but the reticle is way better. It is not red anymore, it is green, and it is much clearer, and with this scope you won't have any problems to be really accurate. Pre-mounted OKP7 has way better reticle, and as you can see, even during the night the reticle is not shiny and you can be really precise even with night vision goggles on. This is definitely one of my favorite scopes in the game. And about the FOV, you can use it on the 75, but I'm recommending you to use it on the 50, just because since this scope is so clean you won't have any problems to shoot the target on the long range. I compared the difference between mounted and non-mounted OKP7, and as you can see, OKP7 with the pre-built mount has a way better reticle than the non-mounted version. Here is again during the night time. The next mount that we are gonna cover is the EKP8. As you can see, this optic looks really nasty. First off, the base of this scope is way too fat and it is covering a lot of your screen. And the second thing that is really bothering me with this scope is the frame. The frame is way too small for my taste. Although you won't have that much problems with the small frame as much as you're gonna have problems with that fat base of that scope. It just covers way too much of your screen. This scope has a 4 different reticles and you can switch them with holding Alt and pressing the right click. My favorite one is the second one, the bigger version of the dot. And as you can see from this, using this scope with the maximum field of view, it is gonna shrink the frame of the scope even more, so I do not recommend you to use this scope on the 75 FOV. On this next example I was testing on the 50 field of view with the rear and the front mount, and as you can see there is not that much difference between rear and front, so you can use this scope on the both parts of your gun. And there is one more thing that you should know: it is really good to use this scope during the night time with the night vision on. You can finally see a really nice picture of the scope reticle. And my final conclusion: if you want to use this scope, use it on the 50 FOV, just because it is gonna increase the size of the frame, and you can use it on the both parts of the gun, and on the rear side and on the front side. This is the pre-mounted version of the EKP8. However, the reticle is not that different like on the OKP7. It is the same scope like on the non-mounted version of the EKP8. Our next scope is PK6. I kinda like the frame of this scope, but when I'm using it on 50 FOV. The rule is the same like on the EKP8. The higher your FOV is, the frame is gonna be smaller, so you'll have tougher times to shoot the enemy. This scope has 3 different reticles. It has a half cross without of the dot, half cross with the dot, and just the dot. And from this example I was testing it on the 50 FOV front versus the rear, and you can clearly see that putting this scope on the rear part of the gun is definitely a win. Mounting this scope on the front side, it is gonna shrink the scope drastically, and I'm strongly recommending you to use PK6 on the rear part of the gun. I was also testing the PK6 on the 75 FOV front versus the rear, and as you can see the rear wins again, and it is possible to use this scope on the maximum FOV. There is is one more important thing that you need to know about PK6 reticles. The first one is bright, so you cannot use it with the night vision. The second one is also bright, but when you choose the third version of the reticle, the brightness is gonna stop. If you pick the dot style of the reticle, you can easily use this scope during the night time. So my recommendation for the PK6, use it on the rear side of the weapon, in the FOV of your choice, and it is a recommended scope during the night time with the night vision on, if you pick the third style of the reticle. Our next scope is FF3, and if you're looking for this first comparison 50 versus 75 FOV on the rear part of the gun, you can clearly see that the reticle has that blurry style. It is really fat and really blurry, so I do not recommend you to use this weapon for the longer distance shots. However, using this scope on the 75 FOV, it is gonna shrink the reticle, so automatically you're gonna decrease the blurriness of that reticle, so my recommendation is to use it on the 75 FOV. From the next example, I was testing rear versus the front on the 50 FOV, and from this example it is clear as day. The further you are from the scope, the picture is gonna be clearer. So I'm strongly recommending you to use this scope on the front part of the mount with the maximum FOV. Just look at it, it looks awesome. I like how tight the scope is, it is really outstanding. And about the nighttime, the brightness is just way too hard. Do not use this scope during the nighttime. So yeah, like I was saying, front part of the weapon, maximum FOV, daytime only. Our next scope is going to be P1X42. I was testing 50 versus 75, and for my taste, this scope looks way better on the 50 FOV. The frame is perfect, the reticles are perfect, and as you can see, you can switch between 3 different reticles, half cross with a dot and the dot only. And since it is possible to use the dot type of the reticle on that gun, I am using this scope on the 50 FOV just because I can have a lot of precise shots on the longer ranges. Placing the scope on the front part of the weapon, it is gonna shrink the frame and you will have harder times in accurate shots if you put this scope on the front. I have also tested the 75 FOV version for the rear and the front, and as you can see, the scope on the rear part also looks really nice, but nowhere close to the 50 FOV. And as you can see, you will have no problems with using this scope during the nighttime with the night vision goggles. The reticles are not bright and you can pick any of those 3 during the nighttime. So like I was saying, I do recommend you to use this scope with the 50 FOV on the rear part of the gun. Our next scope is 553. Can we just skip this scope? It is awful. Everything about this scope is awful. It has only one type of the reticle that is way too fat and way too clunky. You can barely see through the scope just because the frame is way too fat, the base is way too fat, the glass is way too small. Stay away from this scope. I wouldn't recommend this scope to my enemy. I was testing rear and the front, I was testing 50 versus 75 FOV, I was testing nighttime during the daytime. It just nothing works with this scope. Devs, if you're listening, buff it or delete it. It is god awful. Our next scope, MRS. It is one of my favorite scopes just because everything is so clean, everything is so sharp. It has different reticles. You won't have any problems in shooting the targets on the long range with this scope. This scope has 4 different reticles, and as you can see from this comparison, you can use it and on 50 and on the 75 FOV, but again I'm recommending you to use it on the 50 FOV just because you can land more accurate on the further distances. I was also testing the rear versus the front, and you can clearly see that placing this scope on the rear part of the weapon is much better. And about the FOV, you can use this scope on the 75 FOV without any problem. The scope is just way too good. Definitely one of my favorite scopes in the game. Again, just look how good that scope looks even during the night time, even with the night vision goggles on. You can use any type of reticle, it is just way too good. My favorite scope, definitely. Our next scope is OSK 4 times. And boys, we found the bug. I think the left example should be 75 FOV and the right one should be 50 FOV. However, currently it is way better to use OSK 4 times on the 75 FOV than on the 50. Using this scope on the 50, it is gonna shrink your sight drastically, and just look at this scope on the 75 FOV, it is just perfect. It is clean and it is accurate. It has 4 times magnification, so I'm strongly recommending you to use this scope on the longer distances. shots. It has such a beautiful and clean reticle, it is just insane. In the next example, day versus the night, you can clearly see that using this scope during the night with the night vision goggles won't give you any drawbacks. I'm definitely recommending this scope. Last but not least, PSO. The PSO is again 4x scope, and that scope is again for the long shots like the OSK 4x. Nothing much to say, the frame is really nice. And by the way, if you noticed, I tested 50 versus 75 FOV and the scopes looked the same. I think the developers really wanna push that scope balance in the game. I really think that they wanna achieve the balance through the all scopes with this example right here. I think one day all the scopes are gonna look the same, no matter if you're using the 50 FOV or 75 FOV. But currently there are still scopes that require rebalance. And for the last part, I just wanna give you a clear picture between OSK and the PSO. Since we all know that PSO does not have any drawbacks with 75 FOV, I was testing both optics on the 75 FOV, and as you can see, I really think that OSK 4x is the best long range scope in the game currently, just because you have way more sight, the reticle is better, and I think it zooms a little bit more than the PSO. So yeah guys, those are all the scopes in the game, and if you're my patron, you're gonna also get in-depth screenshots that I made just for you, so if you're not my patron, check that out. I hope you learned something new. If you wanna see more content of me, click that subscribe button. I'm actively doing the video tutorials for my favorite games. If this is your first video, check my previous videos, I have a lot of videos for the Escape from Tarkov. Thank you guys for watching and see you next one. Eroktic out.